I will never forget the look on my son-in-law's face when he left my granddaughter in my arms that afternoon. It was a nervous, forced smile, as if time were chasing him. "It will only be an hour, Robert," he told me, avoiding my eyes. I accepted without suspecting a thing. My daughter Emily was not with him at that moment. He explained that she had left earlier for a quick errand, and that he had to resolve something urgent. I watched him hurry away, get into his car, and disappear around the corner without turning his head. In my arms, my granddaughter Sarah played with my buttons, unaware of the silent thunder that was about to fall on our lives. The hour passed slowly. I prepared a snack for the little girl. I told her one of those improvised stories I always invented to make her laugh. Every now and then I looked at the clock. 30 minutes, 40, 50. When the exact hour was up and my son-in-law Michael did not call, a thread of anxiety ran through my chest. I tried to calm down, thinking he was just delayed. I dialed his number for the first time. It rang, and he did not answer. I called again. Nothing. A third time. Straight to voicemail. Then something inside me contracted like a wounded muscle. I tried not to alarm Sarah. I smiled, even though my mouth was trembling. I called my daughter's phone. She did not answer either. Neither of them. My daughter's house was 15 minutes away by car. I thought maybe they had met on the road, that it was all a misunderstanding. But the silence on the other end of both phones became a heavy, suffocating presence. I took my granddaughter in my arms, bundled her up carefully, and left the house with my heart racing and a bitter certainty growing in the pit of my stomach. But before we continue, I would like to know if you subscribe to the channel and if you liked the video. This helps me see that you support me and enjoy my stories. Now, let us continue. I drove faster than my old reflexes allowed. My hands were sweating on the steering wheel. Every red light was torture. When I turned the last corner and saw my daughter's house, I felt the air drain from my lungs. 2 patrol cars blocked the street. An ambulance had its lights on. There were neighbors on the sidewalk, pale faces, nervous whispers. I slammed on the brakes. I got out with the child in my arms, not knowing if my legs could hold me. A police officer stepped in my way. "Sir, you cannot pass here." "My daughter lives there," I said with a broken voice, "and my son-in-law left his daughter with me an hour ago and disappeared." The officer looked at me with a gesture I will never be able to erase from my memory. "Then you are the grandfather," he said gravely. "You need to come inside. It is about your daughter." I felt the ground tilt beneath my feet. I handed my granddaughter to a neighbor without even looking her in the eyes. I walked behind the police officer, like someone walking toward their own sentence. Inside the house, the air was heavy with a metallic smell, mixed with the cheap disinfectant of the paramedics. The living room was turned upside down, a broken vase on the floor, a cushion soaked in blood. And there on the stretcher was my daughter. Her face was bruised, a deep cut on her forehead, her lips swollen, an oxygen tube covering her mouth. The paramedics worked quickly. My eyes moved from her motionless body to the dark stains on the floor, as if my mind refused to accept that this was real. I wanted to get closer, touch her, say her name. A hand stopped me. "She is unconscious," one of the doctors explained. "She has severe trauma. We have to move her immediately." "What happened here?" I asked with a thread of a voice. No one answered. Everyone avoided looking at me. Outside, the murmur of the neighbors grew like a swarm. My son-in-law was nowhere to be found. My daughter was fighting between life and death, and I had just understood that that hour had been a trap. I got into the ambulance without feeling my legs. During the ride to the hospital, I held my daughter's hand cold inert, as if it no longer belonged to me. I spoke to her softly. I asked her not to leave, to hold on, that I was there. The paramedics exchanged technical words that sounded like dry blows to me: low pressure, hemorrhage, possible internal fracture. Upon arriving at the hospital, they left me alone in the waiting room. A long hallway, white lights, the smell of alcohol. I sat on a hard chair while my thoughts fell into disorder. Where was Michael? Why had he disappeared just before what had happened in that house? while I was watching my granddaughter, believing everything was fine. Hours later, a doctor came out to speak to me. "Your daughter is alive," he said, "but her condition is delicate. The blow to the head was severe. We have to wait." I nodded without strength. I did not cry. I did not scream. The fear had left me dry inside. The police questioned me again. I told them exactly the same thing over and over. That my son-in-law left the girl with me. That he promised to return in an hour. That he did not answer my calls. That I found everything surrounded by patrol cars. They wrote down every word. They asked me if the relationship between my daughter and her husband was good. I hesitated. I remembered Silence's evasive looks, calls cut short when I entered the room. I told them the bitter truth, that I never wanted to see what was now beginning to be revealed by blows. When I returned home at dawn with my granddaughter asleep in my arms, her little face rested calmly on my shoulder, unaware of the hell that had just opened beneath our feet. I laid her in bed and covered her with a blanket. I sat beside her for a long time. I watched her breathe, as if that were the only thing still connecting me to life. I took out my phone one more time. I dialed Michael's number. It was still off. Then I looked around the room, the toys, the drawings on the wall, the photograph of my daughter smiling with her husband on the nightstand. I felt a knot of rage burning my chest. He had not only beaten my daughter, he had also used her. He had left her lying there to flee, and he had used his own daughter as a screen to escape. In that instant, I understood everything. That had not been a domestic argument or an accident. It had been an attempt to erase everything, to erase his trail, his guilt, his crime. I got up slowly. I went to the window. Outside the street was silent, but inside me something had changed forever. I was no longer just a scared grandfather, nor just a desperate father. Something much darker had awakened in me, and I still did not know how far it would take me. The night at the hospital turned into an endless succession of white lights, hurried steps and clocks that seemed never to advance. I sat in the waiting room with my back hunched, my coat still damp from the cold sweat running through my body. Every time a door opened, my heart jumped like a frightened animal. I saw doctors, nurses, empty stretchers come out. But my daughter did not appear, and I did not know if continuing to wait was an act of faith or pure desperation. After 2 hours, a doctor approached. She had tired eyes, the calm voice of someone who has learned to speak of tragedies as if they were routine. She explained that Emily had suffered a severe blow to the head and possible internal injuries. They were stabilizing her. She had lost a lot of blood. The words fell on me like stones. I nodded without fully understanding. Only one phrase remained stuck in my chest. The next few hours are decisive. I was left alone again. I squeezed the rosary I had carried in my pocket for years between my hands. I was not a particularly religious man, but in that moment, any idea of something superior became a last refuge. My thoughts went back and forth between my daughter's face on the stretcher and my granddaughter's calm face, sleeping in my house, not knowing her world could break before dawn. In the early morning, they finally let me see her. I entered the room with unsure steps. My daughter lay in the bed, connected to several tubes, with half her body covered by white sheets. Only her face was visible, swollen, bruised, almost unrecognizable. I approached slowly, as if I were afraid of waking her from a dream she might not want to return from. I took her hand. It was warm alive, and that minimal heat was enough for my legs to almost give way. "I am here, daughter," I whispered. "Do not go yet, please." There was no answer, only the rhythmic beeping of the machines, marking her breathing. When I went out to the waiting room again, 2 police officers were waiting for me. They wanted to ask me more questions. I repeated every detail of the previous afternoon again. They asked me about previous arguments, threats, prior beatings. I hesitated, lowered my gaze, and then I understood that my silence of years was also a form of complicity. I confessed that I had noticed Change's sadness in my daughter's eyes, calls that ended abruptly when I entered. But I never saw clear marks. I never wanted to see them. One of the officers wrote something down with a grave expression. "We believe your son-in-law fled the scene after a violent assault," he said. "A search warrant has already been issued." That phrase transformed my fear into something new, denser, darker. Certainty. At dawn, I went home to wash up and get clean clothes. I opened the door carefully not to wake Sarah, but she was already sitting on the bed with big wide eyes holding her doll against her chest. "Grandpa, is Mommy sick?" she asked with a trembling voice. I sat beside her, swallowing the knot burning my throat. "Yes, my love," I replied. "She is in the hospital. The doctors are taking care of her." "And Daddy," she insisted. That single word hurt me more than any other. "Daddy had to go for a moment," I lied. "But he is going to come back." I did not know if he would ever come back or in what form. I hugged her gently. She rested her head on my chest and closed her eyes. Her breathing was slow, warm. I held her as if she were the last anchor keeping me standing. I went back to the hospital that same morning. My daughter was still unconscious. The doctors said the worst of the hemorrhage had passed, but the neurological risk was still high. I nodded, gave thanks, asked just enough. Inside, a single question tore at me relentlessly. What had that man I once called son-in-law done to her? In the following hours, the police found Michael's car abandoned on the outskirts of the city. Inside, traces of blood documents a destroyed phone. That was no longer a simple disappearance. It was a calculated escape. When the officers told me, I felt something definitive break inside me. Fear stopped being fear. It transformed into a dull, deep rage that did not scream, that did not tremble, but burned like red-hot iron. That afternoon, sitting again by my daughter's bed, I observed every bandage, every bruise, every wound. I remembered old scenes. My daughter helping her husband walk when he pretended to be sick, cooking when he claimed to be tired, justifying absences, smiling when I sensed something was not right. Everything fit now with a cruel clarity. I had asked her many times to come back home with me to rest, not to overwork herself. She always answered the same thing. "Dad, he is good to me. He is just going through a bad time." And now there she was, unconscious, paying with her body for all the lies she sustained to protect him. At night, finally my eyes closed for a few minutes on the hospital chair. I dreamed of her as a child running through a patio full of flowers, calling me loudly. I woke up with a start when I heard her name spoken aloud. A doctor was watching me. "Mr. Robert," he said, "your daughter woke up." I entered trembling. Her eyes were open, disoriented, full of an ancient fear I had never seen in her before. She moved barely when she recognized me. "Dad," she whispered. I leaned over her, not knowing whether to cry or be silent. "I'm here," I said. "Everything is going to be okay." Her eyes filled with tears. She slowly turned her face toward the wall, as if she were ashamed to look at me. "He tried to," she said. "Do not speak now." I interrupted her. "Rest." But she squeezed my hand with unexpected strength. "He left me," she whispered. "He thought I was dead." I felt a dry blow to the chest. "You are not dead," I replied with a broken voice. "You are here with me." She closed her eyes, exhausted. A silent sob ran through her body. In that instant, I knew it was no longer just about finding a man who fled. It was no longer just about a betrayal. It was about years of hidden horror, of a violence my daughter had endured in silence, and of a granddaughter who now depended on me not to grow up in the middle of that same hell. When I left the room, the light in the hallway seemed colder than ever. I walked to the hospital window and looked at the city from above. Cars, people, routines, alien to our drama. Everything remained the same for others, but for me, nothing would ever be the same. The police kept searching, I kept waiting, and my daughter between life and death had just confirmed, with a whisper, what I feared most. Her husband had tried to erase her from the world, and I, who until that day had only been a tired grandfather and a father full of guilt, began to understand that my place in this story had not ended yet. It was just beginning. For years I got used to believing that my daughter's silence was synonymous with maturity. I thought her reserved way of living, of not telling me too much, was simply the natural distance between an old father and a grown woman. I never suspected that silence was a cage. Now sitting by her hospital bed, with her still fragile breathing marking the rhythm of my thoughts, every memory began to order itself with cruel clarity. The first time I noticed something strange had been almost 4 years ago. Emily came home with dark glasses in the middle of winter. She said she had a headache. I accepted it without insisting. That night when she stayed to sleep, I saw her go to the bathroom, and passing by the light, I noticed a dark bruise under her cheekbone. Before I could ask her, she lowered her gaze and said she had hit herself with the kitchen door. I wanted to believe her. Today I understand that was the beginning of the fear. Then came the absences, the calls canceled, at the last minute the constant excuses. He's tired, he has a lot of work, or he could not leave the car. Her voice always sounded the same when she defended him. Tense, forced, almost pleading. More than once I invited her to stay a few days with me to rest. She always found a reason to return to her house as soon as possible, as if someone invisible were pulling a rope tied to her waist. I also remember the time Sarah asked me, with the innocence of someone who knows not how to hide anything, why her mommy cried at night. I laughed uncomfortably and answered that it must be from tiredness. She nodded, although in her eyes there was a doubt that no child should carry. That image hit me now with ruthless force. The night had been a witness to many tears that I refused to hear. When my daughter woke up for the second time in the hospital, she was a little more conscious. She could not speak much, but she understood. I took her hand and spoke slowly, without rushing her. I told her that her daughter was safe with me, that she should not worry about anything. Upon hearing her child's name, a silent tear rolled down her cheek. That tear carried an old accumulated fear. "Dad," she whispered with difficulty, "I tried to leave many times." I squeezed her hand. "You do not have to talk now," I told her. "The important thing is that you are alive." She shook her head as if there were something worse than death that needed to come out. "He knew," she continued. "He knew that one day I was going to run away." Those words went through me like a knife. She did not want to say anything else. She closed her eyes exhausted. I stayed beside her without moving, as if my body could protect her from the past just by being there. That same afternoon, upon returning home, I began to go through, without permission, the little she had left stored in my closet the last time she stayed to sleep. Clothes, a couple of old notebooks, a folder of documents. Inside I found photocopies of police reports that were never filed. Testimonies written and then crossed out, blurry photographs of bruises taken in front of the mirror, always undated, messages where he apologized with empty words, promising to change, swearing love after every blow. I read every page with a mixture of shame, rage, and guilt. My daughter had asked for help many times without saying a single word aloud. I did not want to see. I chose to believe the comfortable version, the one of the marriage with normal problems, the one of the complicated but hard-working son-in-law. Today I understood that comfort can also be a form of cowardice. The police questioned me again that night. This time I hid nothing. I told them about the dark glasses, the avoided visits, the mood swings, the way my daughter always went to another room to answer the phone. Every detail that seemed insignificant to me before now shone like a signal I had ignored for too long. One of the officers looked up from his notebook. "Sir, your son-in-law had a record for violence with an ex-partner," he said. "The case never prospered because she withdrew the complaint." I felt the world split in two. He had not only hurt my daughter, he had done it before, and we as a family had opened the door to him without knowing. That night I did not sleep. I sat by my granddaughter's bed, who breathed with a soft whistle, hugging a teddy bear. I thought about the moment that man entered our life for the first time. Polite quiet, with a calm smile, he asked me for my daughter's hand with formality. I felt proud to see her well accompanied. I never imagined I was leaving my girl in the hands of her future executioner. At dawn, I went back to the hospital. Emily was more stable. The doctor said that if she continued like this, she could start speaking more clearly in a few days. That small hope was the only thread I held on to not fall into madness. While I was sitting by her bed, she opened her eyes slowly. "Dad!" she called me with a weak voice. I leaned toward her. When I woke up, she said, he was still there. He looked at me and said that I had ruined his life. I felt my hands trembling. I asked him not to leave. She continued. I begged him to think of our daughter. Her eyes moistened. He just pushed me and took his bag. I could not hold back the tears. I turned away for a second so she would not see me cry, but she had already noticed. "It was not your fault," she told me, with a threat of a voice. "I never told you everything out of shame." I looked at her again. "Nothing justifies what he did to you," I replied. "Nothing. And we will find him." She nodded slowly. I thought many times about running away," she whispered. "But he always said that if I left, he would take Sarah away, that no one would believe me." I felt my chest harden. From now on, I told her, "He will never touch you or scare you again, I promise you." She closed her eyes, exhausted. I stood there repeating that promise in silence, over and over, like an oath that had no turning back. Upon leaving the hospital that afternoon, the sky was covered by heavy clouds. The police informed me that they had tracked suspicious bank movements of Michael in another state. He could be preparing his final escape. He was a fugitive. A cornered man is always more dangerous than a powerful one. I returned home with the feeling that everything I was, until that day, had been left behind. I was no longer just the protective grandfather, nor the repentant father. Now I was the guardian of 2 lives that he had tried to destroy with blows. That night I sat in the dining room surrounded by papers, photos, evidence. There were no screams in the house. There were no sirens. There were no police. Only the ticking of the clock and my held breath. I thought of my daughter asleep on a stretcher, of my granddaughter, hugging her doll, without yet understanding the size of her tragedy. And I understood something I never thought I would accept. The monster we were now looking for had been living among us for years, feeding on our silence, on our faith, on our need to believe that love always straightens what is twisted. I had arrived late to see it, but I would not be late to stop him. The police began to move faster starting that day. It was no longer just a case of domestic violence. Now there was an attempted homicide, a victim in serious condition, and a fugitive responsible who had used his own daughter as a smokescreen. I accompanied every step of the investigation like someone walking on glass, with care, with fear, with a rage I barely knew how to contain. Every new piece of data was a blow to the stomach. The detective in charge came to see me in the morning. He carried a thick folder under his arm. "Your son-in-law had been preparing the escape for weeks," he told me bluntly. "He sold some belongings, withdrew cash in stages, and stopped paying certain bills, so as not to leave clear traces." "Since when did he know?" I asked. "Since long before attacking your daughter," he replied. "That day he just moved up the plane." I felt a chill run down my back. While I played with my granddaughter, believing I was watching a quiet afternoon, he was already executing a programmed disappearance. The police had found bus tickets under a false name, but the trail had been lost at a terminal in the interior of the country. They had also detected money withdrawals at ATMs at dawn, always in different places. Michael was not fleeing out of panic. He was fleeing with method. "And my granddaughter?" I asked. "Did he leave any documents about her?" "That is the most alarming part," the detective said. "We have indications that he planned to take her as soon as his wife disappeared." I clenched my fists tightly. If I had not been there that day, if I had refused to watch the child, even for an hour right now, the story would be different. Perhaps he would have fled with the little girl in his arms, leaving my daughter dead on the floor of that living room. That night, I could barely sleep. I got up several times to check that Sarah was still breathing. I watched her sleep with her chest rising and falling slowly, not knowing that someone had tried to make her an orphan twice in a single afternoon. The next morning, I went back to the hospital. My daughter was a little more lucid. She still spoke little, but her memories began to order themselves brokenly. "Dad," she told me. He had been acting strange for days, nervous as if something big were about to happen. "Did he tell you something before the attack?" I asked. She nodded with difficulty. "He asked me for the documents, the passports, the birth certificates." I felt the air thicken in the room. "He told me it was for some paperwork," she continued. "When I hesitated, he got angry. A lot." I closed my eyes for a moment. "Then we argued about Sarah," she whispered. "I did not want to leave her alone with him that day." And then she could not continue. Her body still did not allow her to relive it all. But I had already understood. My daughter had been beaten for wanting to protect her daughter. She had been punished for trying to break the cage. Upon leaving the room, I swore in silence that I would never allow that man to get close to either of them again. The following hours were full of calls, reports, and photographs. The police deployed an updated sketch with my son-in-law's image. He appeared in terminals, gas stations, borders. His face began to circulate. Some had seen him. No one had stopped him yet. A woman showed up at the police station that same afternoon. She had recognized the fugitive on television. She said that years ago she had been his partner, that he had beaten her, threatened her, isolated her, that one night he also left her lying on the floor and fled with her money. She survived. My daughter, too. Others, perhaps, had not had that luck. Every testimony was one more stab to my conscience. That night, while we ate dinner in silence in front of the turned-off television, my granddaughter played with her doll, unaware of everything. Suddenly she looked up. "Grandpa, Daddy is going to pick me up at the hospital." I felt my heart break. "Your daddy is traveling, my love," I answered carefully. "But you are with me and with Mommy." "And is he not mad any more?" she asked. I swallowed hard. "He cannot hurt us any more," I assured her. She nodded as if she understood more than her age allowed. Then she went back to her doll. I stood watching her for a long time, wondering how many times she had heard screams behind a closed door. On the fourth day, a concrete lad appeared. Michael had tried to sell a used truck near the border. The buyer, recognizing his face on the news, alerted the police. When they arrived, he was no longer there. He had left false documents and recent prints. They were close. That afternoon, I was called again to testify. I signed papers, authorized searches, requested protection for my house. Now I was also a target, according to the police. The main witness, the man guarding the child he had wanted to take. I slept with a chair wedged against the door and the phone under the pillow, not out of fear of dying, but out of fear of failing. On the fifth day, the police intercepted a call. My son-in-law had tried to contact an old associate to ask for false documents and money. The voice was altered, desperate. The methodical monster was starting to lose control. "He is cornered," the detective told me, "and that makes him dangerous." I looked at my granddaughter, who was sleeping deeply in her bed. "It also makes him clumsy," I replied, "and clumsy men make mistakes." That night he called my daughter's phone again from an unknown number. I answered. "Robert," his voice said on the other end, "you do not know what I am living." I felt a dry cold run down my neck. "Yes, I do know," I replied. "You are living it because you did not have the courage to face what you did." "She is alive by chance," he said with a nervous laugh. "No one was going to know." I closed my eyes with contained rage. "You are a proud old man," he continued. "You think you can play hero." "I'm not playing anything," I replied. "I protect my family." There was an uncomfortable silence. "Do not look for me," he said finally. "If the police find me, everyone will lose." "You already lost everything the day you hit my daughter," I answered him. "Now you only choose how to end." He hung up the call. I immediately gave the number to the police. The hunt was closing in little by little. I went back to sit by my daughter's bed that night. She slept peacefully under the effect of the medications. I tucked a strand of hair behind her ear as I did when she was a child. "It is almost over," I whispered to her. "Hold on a little longer." I looked out the hospital window. The city shone in thousands of lights alien to our tragedy. But I knew that in some dark point of that same map, the man who had destroyed my family was running aimlessly without shelter, with every exit blocking one after another. He was no longer fleeing toward freedom. He fled straight toward his capture, and I was ready to see him fall. The fifth day dawned with a strange stillness, as if the world had held its breath, waiting for something. I arrived early at the hospital with the same knot tightening my chest. My daughter had been stable for several hours. The doctors had slightly reduced the medication, and that morning there was a real possibility that she could speak clearly. I did not know if I was prepared to hear what had remained hidden behind her silences for so long. I entered the room with slow steps. She was awake. Her eyes were still tired, but there was no longer that thick fog of the previous days in them. I approached, took her hand, and for the first time I felt she squeezed me with true consciousness. "Dad," she said in a whisper, "I do not want to keep quiet any more." Those words pierced my soul. "You do not have to do it yet," I replied. "Just rest." She shook her head gently. "If I do not say it now, I will never be able to." I took a deep breath. I sat beside her. I prepared my heart to receive what had been denied to me for years. It all started shortly after Sarah was born. He changed. He became jealous, controlling. He checked my phone. He asked me who I talked to, what time I went out, why I was late. At first I thought it was insecurity. Then I understood it was dominance. I gritted my teeth without interrupting her. "The first hit came after a silly argument," she continued. "He pushed me against the wall and then cried, asking for forgiveness. He swore it would not happen again. I believed him." I closed my eyes for an instant. Then came the insults, the threats, the constant fear. I pretended in front of everyone that I was fine, especially with you. I was ashamed. I did not want you to think I had made a mistake. My hands were trembling. "When I got pregnant for the second time, he hit me so hard I lost the baby," she whispered. "He said it was an accident. I wanted to believe it too." I felt the air leave me. I squeezed her hand tightly. "I never told you because I was afraid of losing my daughter. He always said that if I spoke, no one would believe me." Tears began to fall from me uncontrollably. "And that day," she continued with a thread of a voice, "I could not take it any more. I told him I was going to leave, that I would go with you, that he would not touch me again." She remained silent for a second. Then her eyes filled with panic, remembering it. "Then he hit me like never before. He threw me to the floor. He kicked me. I saw everything black. I could not contain a choked moan. When I woke up, he was standing over me. He told me, 'That is it. Now it is over.' I thought he was going to help me, but he took his bag and left. He thought I was dead, Dad." I felt the world undoing itself between my hands. "He left me on the floor, bleeding to death. And he took his daughter to use her as an alibi," she murmured. "I thought I would never see you again." I leaned over her. I rested my forehead on hers, and I cried as I had not cried even at her mother's funeral. "Forgive me," I repeated. "Forgive me for not having seen it." She moved her head slowly. "It is not your fault. I hid too well." Before continuing, tell me here in the comments what you think of this story so far and what you would do in her place. Do not leave the video because what comes next will give you goosebumps. I took a deep breath and wiped my tears with the back of my hand. "Now all that is going to end," I told her. "You are no longer alone. Never again." She felt exhausted but relieved, as if she had just taken an impossible weight off her chest. Hours later, the doctor confirmed to me that her condition was improving slowly. The physical wounds would heal with time. The ones of the soul would take more. But at least now they were no longer hidden. I went out to the hallway with my body tense and my heart on fire. My daughter's confession was the piece missing to understand everything. He had not only fled, he had planned to kill her, and had used his own daughter as a shield. The police arrived that same afternoon. They took her statement carefully, respecting her fragility. I stayed by her side the whole time. Every word of hers was an open wound, but also one more step toward justice. Now we have the full classification of the crime, the detective told me. Attempted homicide, repeated violence, abandonment of a person, and attempted child abduction. I nodded without feeling any triumph. He can no longer hide, he added. When we catch him, he won't get out easily. That night I returned home exhausted. My granddaughter waited for me awake, sitting on the bed. "Grandpa, I dreamed Mommy called me," she said with a small smile. "Is that good?" I knelt in front of her and hugged her. "Yes, my love, it is very good." "Is Daddy coming back?" she asked innocently. I closed my eyes a second before answering. "No, honey, not anymore, but I am here, and Mommy is also coming back with you very soon." She nodded without asking more questions, settled on the pillow, and fell asleep in a few seconds. I sat beside her, watching over her sleep, like someone protecting the only pure thing left after a fire. That night, I almost did not sleep. I thought of my daughter fighting to pull herself together. I thought of the rage accumulated for years. I thought of the man who was still free fleeing, breathing, believing perhaps he could still escape everything. But I also thought of something new. Now no one would come to tell me I had no proof. Now the truth was complete. There were no more shadows or excuses. From that moment I stopped being just a wounded father. I became the main accuser of the man who tried to erase my daughter from the world. And I did not plan to stop until I saw him fall. I never imagined that at my 68 years I would learn the real weight of a new word, accuse. I had always been a man who conciliated, who sought peace, even when it hurt. But that morning, after hearing the full truth from my daughter's lips, something broke definitely in me. I no longer wanted to understand anyone. I no longer sought excuses. I only wanted justice. The police returned to the hospital shortly after dawn. They took new statements. They reviewed every detail with a rigor I had not seen before. My daughter, weak but firm, repeated what happened without hesitation. For the first time in years, she spoke without fear. I sat beside her in silence, holding her with the sole force of my presence, like a wall against the past that tried to swallow her. Again. When the agents finished, one of them asked me to step out into the hallway. "Mr. Robert," he told me, "now your testimony is fundamental. You are the one who was with the child, who discovered the flight, who provided the fugitive's first movements. You are no longer just family, you are a key witness." I had never heard that term applied to me. Key witness. It sounded big, heavy, definitive. "I will do whatever is necessary," I replied, and I meant it truly. That same day, I handed the police all the papers I had found in my daughter's folder. Photographs, messages, drafts of complaints. I also gave them access to accounts' old numbers calendars. I opened every drawer of family intimacy without reservations. There was nothing left to protect, except the two of them. In the afternoon, they took me to the district attorney's office. I had never stepped in a place like that. Gray rooms, hard benches, doors opening and closing without pause. A young prosecutor explained to me with a neutral voice the steps to follow. I listened with a calm I did not recognize as mine. Everything that would have intimidated me before now seemed small in front of the horror that had knocked on our door. "You can constitute yourself as a plaintiff," he said, "have direct access to the case." "I will do it," I replied without hesitation. I signed documents. I gave more statements. I handed over timelines, dates, names. Every piece of data was a piece fitting into the puzzle of the monster that had lived camouflaged among us. Upon leaving the building, the air hit my face. I breathed deep. I felt for the first time that I was no longer walking blindly. I had a course. I had a goal. I returned to the hospital before nightfall. Emily was more awake, although pain was still drawn in every movement. She looked at me with a mixture of fear and relief. "Dad, is he going to go to jail?" she asked. I did not lie. If justice does its job, yes. She nodded in silence, her eyes filled with tears. "I am scared he will come back," she whispered, "that he will come out of some corner and finish what he started." I leaned over her. "He will never touch you again," I promised her. "If he even tries to get close, he will find me first." It was not an empty threat. It was a truth. The second part of my day began when I left the hospital and returned home. Another battle awaited me there, that of raising a girl who was starting to feel the void of her father without understanding it yet, making her dinner, helping her with the bath, reading her a story before sleeping. Every daily gesture became an act of resistance against tragedy. That night, while brushing her hair, Sarah looked at me through the mirror. "Grandpa did. I do something bad so Daddy would leave." I felt my heart break. "No, my love," I told her slowly. "You did nothing bad. Nothing." "Then why does he not come back?" There was no simple answer. I took a breath. Because sometimes adults make big mistakes and hurt those they love most. But that is not your fault. She seemed to think about my words. Then she hugged me by the neck. "I want you to be my daddy now," she said. I could not hold back the tears. That night, when I finally put her to sleep, I stayed sitting by her bed for a long time. I understood that my life had turned irreversibly. I was no longer just the man seeking justice. I was the only wall between a girl and a past that threatened to devour her. The next morning, key news arrived. The fugitive's bank movements had been tracked to a border city. He had withdrawn a significant sum of money at an ATM near a gas station. The police believed he was preparing his departure from the country. "We are going to issue a red alert," the detective informed me. "Now his face will be at every checkpoint." I hung up the phone and stood motionless for a few seconds. The siege was closing, and I felt something strange growing inside me, a cold calm. In the afternoon, I was summoned again by the DA's office, this time for a technical hearing. The lawyers spoke, the judges listened, files passed from hand to hand. I declared with a firm voice everything I had seen, heard, sensed. I did not cry, I did not tremble, I could no longer afford it. Upon returning home, I found a patrol car parked in front of the door. Preventive protection, 2 officers rotating day and night. Reality was no longer a family story. It was a high-risk judicial case. My granddaughter got used to seeing police officers as if they were part of the landscape. I pretended calm in front of her, but I slept little. Every night noise kept me alert, every shadow transformed into a threat. One night, near 3 in the morning, I received an anonymous message on my phone, just 5 words. "This is not over yet." My stomach shrank. I showed the message to the police immediately. They traced it. The origin was uncertain, possibly from a burner phone. It was a warning or a desperate act. That threat confirmed what we already knew. He still believed he had power, still believed he could scare. I, on the other hand, no longer feared for myself, only for my daughter, only for my granddaughter. And that made me more dangerous than any weapon. Days later, while accompanying my daughter in a new medical evaluation session, she took my hand. "Dad," she said, "thank you for not letting go of me now." I squeezed her fingers. "Never again," I replied. "I swear." I left the room with the certainty that I was no longer the same man who had accepted watching a child for an hour that afternoon. That naive grandfather had disappeared among patrol cars, hospitals, and confessions. Now I was something else. Now I walked as the accuser of a man who had believed he could erase my daughter from the world, and I was following him step by step until the end. The border city became a constant name in our conversations. Every new police report ended there as if all the pain of the last days had concentrated on that point on the map. I had learned to listen to the agents with the tense patience of someone awaiting a sentence. The fugitive's movements were fragmentary, elusive like himself. A blurry camera, a cash payment, A brief call from a disposable phone. Never enough to catch him, always enough to know he was still breathing. My routine became a pendulum between the hospital, the prosecutor's office, and my own house. In the morning, I accompanied my daughter in new medical evaluations. Every day, she could move her hand a little more articulate, her voice better. Her body healed slowly, but her gaze still lived, scared, as if even under the hospital roof she suspected he could appear between the doors. I spoke to her with a calm voice. I told her what Sarah was doing. I invented happy scenes so her mind would find other places to rest. In the afternoon, I stopped by the prosecutor's office. The lawyers reviewed calls, transfers possible accomplices. We discovered the money he had withdrawn was not all his. He had defrauded 2 more people besides using cards in third parties' names. He was no longer just an aggressor. He was a fugitive with a chain of crimes snapping at his heels. Every new accusation shrank his horizon of escape. The nights were the hardest. The house before, full of laughter and trivial arguments, had become a silent territory where every shadow seemed an enemy. My granddaughter slept in the room next to mine. I left the door open to hear her breathing. Sometimes she woke up with nightmares and ran to my bed. I received her without questions, hugging her with the clumsiness of an old man, learning too late to be a shelter. "Grandpa," she asked me one night with eyes still closed from sleep, "is my daddy bad?" The question went through me like a needle. "Your daddy made big mistakes," I answered carefully. "He did things he should not have done." "And that is why he does not come back," I swallowed hard. "For that very reason." She settled against my chest as if looking for a more solid answer than my words. "Then you are not going to make a mistake with me," she said. I kissed her hair. "Never." The next morning I received an urgent call from the detective. They had located the fugitive in a cheap boarding house near the border. A woman had recognized him from television. When the patrol arrived, only an empty room remained, a messy mattress and remains of cold food. But it was the first time they had him so close. "He is desperate," the detective told me, "and a desperate man makes mistakes." That phrase accompanied me all day. Mistakes. I thought of all the ones I had made by not listening to my daughter, by not looking deeper. She was paying with her body for those mistakes of mine and hers. I could not allow hers to flee forever. That afternoon, upon arriving at the hospital, I found Emily awake and distressed. She had received a call from a hidden number. She heard his breathing on the other end for several seconds before they hung up. He did not say a single word, but she recognized him. I knew it by the way her face emptied. "It was him," she whispered. I felt my skin crawl. "Did he say anything?" She shook her head. "He just breathed so I would know he was still alive." I clenched my fist with rage. "That is not power," I told her. "It is fear. He no longer commands anything. He only threatens from the dark." She nodded, trembling. I stayed by her bed until she calmed down. Then I went out to the hallway and called the detective. I relayed every detail. And that type of call, he said, was typical of those who felt the siege closing in. It was his way of pretending he still controlled something. The following hours brought new movements. A security camera caught him entering a bus station. He was wearing a cap, different clothes. It was not the image of a free man. It was that of someone running aimlessly. He bought a ticket to a southern city. The police deployed an immediate operation. I did not take the phone off my hand. I felt every vibration was the anteroom of something definitive. That night, while I prepared dinner, the radio announced the capture of a suspect at the southern terminal. He matched the fugitive's description. I felt my heart rise to my throat. I turned off the stove. I sat down without strength. I called the detective immediately. He took a while to answer. "It is not him," he said finally. "It was someone else." The blow of frustration was dry. I felt the tiredness hang on my shoulders like a wet sack again. The hunt continued. Before sleeping, I checked my house drawers again, old photos of my daughter as a child, her first day of school, her graduation dress, her wedding. I stopped at that last one. She smiled with hope. He held her hand with a protective gesture. I observed with pride from behind. I tore the photograph carefully, not with hate, with a lucid sadness that no longer needed to deceive itself. At dawn, my phone rang again. This time it was not a threat. It was the detective. "We have him located," he said.